today on Revelation to Transformation
into the different areas of our own life. And so the light progressively starts to shine into the different areas. Condemnation would fall when we reject the light and prefer the blindness of darkness. And I think people are looking into the abyss all the time in the world, and that's all they know, and that's their hell. And they're living hell all the time. And we come along and present them with an alternate version of the abyss. You know, work. Maybe you miss that. And they go, miss it? I'm already in it. I want something that's going to get me out of it.
What is meant by the term salvation? And what are some ways to effectively share your faith with others? Pastor Paul White was recently asked to submit 6 30-minute sermons aimed at an audience of unbelievers in order to introduce them to the gospel of Jesus Christ. These sermons are currently airing on an international Christian satellite network with a potential audience of over 1 billion people. Now you can own these 6 sermons on DVD as study tools for effective evangelism, or share them with friends and loved ones who need to hear the good news about God's love and Christ's sacrifice. This 6 DVD set can be yours for only $30 plus $5 shipping and handling. Contact us today at 1-877-244-3353 or order online at www.paulwhiteministries.org.
12th chapter, which will be our start, our foundation, and then we'll work back through the book of John a little bit. But I want to read to you something from Time magazine. Don't do that often, and I promise that when I do it, we'll have a reason for that. But reading to you from Time, and this is from years ago. This was, I don't know how many of you remember when, this was a few decades ago, in fact, when Pope John Paul II, there was an attempt on his life, and the would-be assassin was imprisoned, and the Pope visited his would-be assassin in prison, basically forgave him. Time magazine, in that moment, wrote, I want to read to you a quote from that article. "There will be no escape from wars, from hunger, from misery, from racial discrimination, from denial of human rights, and not even from missiles if our hearts are not changed." This was from that article. This wasn't what the Pope said, what somebody else said. And I was struck as I read that of how theologically or scripturally sound that statement was by a secular writer about an event. There will be no escape from all of the stuff that is, in the eyes of the world, inescapable, which are wars and death and human rights and racial tensions and all these things, without a change of heart. And that's the message of the gospel, is that Christ doesn't change just your attitude. Christ comes in and gives you a brand new heart, a new way of thinking about things, a new way of approaching things. And so that's on the front of my mind tonight as I share with you John 12, verse 46. I want to start with just one verse. And I want you to note the powerful implications in this verse. John 12 and 46. I, of course, is Jesus. The words are written in red. I have come as a light into the world, that whoever believes in me should not abide in darkness. Now, that's the only verse I want to start with right now. We'll work our way towards this in a moment and then past it as we get to it. But notice the powerful implication that the world is in darkness and that all a man has to do to move from the realm of darkness into the realm of light is believe on Jesus. I don't want to say oversimplification of justification, but I don't know how much simpler it can be than believe on Jesus and then you are justified. If that's oversimplification, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to make it tough anymore. You're in darkness, you believe on Jesus, you're in light. It doesn't say every area of your life starts springing forth light. It doesn't say every area of your life gets cleaned up instantly. It doesn't say that you're not still full of unforgiveness or bitterness or pain or guilt or whatever, but you've now transferred dimensions from someone who's walking in a place of darkness to someone who's walking in a place of light. And it happened in one moment. again, the fruit may not be there yet, but the seed's in the ground. And the most important thing to be taken from this is if a man comes into the light, as Jesus is the one in the light, you can actually go from darkness into the light, which prompts this question: are we heading towards the abyss? Are things naturally digressing and getting worse? I ask that question because, and this is not a reflection on the church, but my own experience in Christianity and my own experience as a preacher, I would have said, and I remember saying it many times and hearing it many times, man is just getting worse. He's on a downward spiral. He started out great in the Garden of Eden, and then he sinned, and then from that day on, it's just been a downward slope, which would prompt anybody thinking correctly to go, well, why should we have kids in this? You know, if it's just a slide and there's no hope and everything's going to get worse and nothing's ever going to get better, why bring anybody into this hellhole, seeing as next generation is definitely going to be worse than this generation, and 2 generations from now, who knows, maybe nobody will even be here because we're all going to blow ourselves up. Does that sound kind of familiar with the way the world has talked for quite some time, quite a few decades, at least in most of our lifetime? So it prompts me to ask, is not only are we heading into the abyss, is the world destined to get worse? I think you know how I feel about that. If you took Christ out of the equation, if you removed Christ the King in his kingdom, I think you got a good argument everything will just get worse. I really do. Because without the King in his kingdom, sin reigns. Wickedness wins. It's eye for an eye. It's no love your neighbor as yourself. That's kingdom talk. Or it's no love one another as I've loved you. That's really kingdom talk. It's eye for an eye, and as Gandhi said, if we all lived eye for an eye, eventually everybody would be blind. The reality is without the king on his throne in his kingdom, okay, I'll give it to you, we're not going to make it. But I think we have a king on his throne in his kingdom, and his name is Jesus. And the church is an extension of that kingdom. We're not the kingdom, but we're an extension of that kingdom. And so I got to answer the question, no, we're not heading into the abyss, and no, it doesn't have to get worse. In fact, I think things are getting better all the time because of the king being reestablished in people's consciousness as being on his throne in a kingdom. Or, in a nutshell, I think the light's getting turned on in the middle of darkness. Now, was that not what Jesus said? Just look at it again. We'll be there more than once. John 12:46. I have come as light. What did Jesus come as? Light. Into where? Into the world. So when he walked in, there must have been a darkness that is impenetrable without him. So he came in. Now that's just good, solid preaching. I mean, there's the world. It's on its way to hell. That's all the things we like to say. Hell in a handbasket, whatever. God's outside of it. God moves into it. The minute God moves in, boom, here comes heaven on earth. God walks into our dimension and brings to us good gifts to men, what Paul told the church at Ephesus. So Jesus walks as light into the middle of darkness. Whoever believes in me doesn't have to live or dwell or abide, is King James. Don't have to abide in darkness. So just by believing on the light, we're not forced to abide in the darkness. I want to show you something fascinating about the book of John. I have fallen in love all over again on my daily journey through the fourth gospel with what has always been my favorite gospel, the book of John. But I would have told you before I started my daily podcast journey, which has been going nearly a year now, and I'm not out of the 13th chapter. I would have told you that I love the book of John because it's different than the other gospels, and it has stories the other gospels don't have, and all that's true. And I still love it for that reason, but I'm loving it now for a whole nother reason. I think John was really trying to rewrite the narrative. I really think John, the reason his gospel is so different is he's really trying to frame Jesus in a way that the world had never framed God in before. He made God personal. He made him human, and he put him on earth with a bunch of other humans. But he made him exceptional. Because with every chapter you read, he's exceptional. He's not like anybody else in the room, but he's like everybody else in the room. That's hard to do. And he's exceptional in that every time he moves, touches, talks, he's light. And John uses the dynamic of light and dark a lot in his gospel. I'm going to show you the highlights tonight from the beginning on up to where we're at. And then when we're done, it culminates in one of the most fantastic moments in the life and ministry of Jesus, in which he's just trying to reach in and minister to somebody, but the dynamic of light and dark never really stops. Go to John 1. I try not to stay on each one too long. There's a lot of exegetical work we could do and tell you why the scripture's there, and then I'd maybe get a little bogged down and stay too long. So what I'll try to do is read for you, and we're really moving left to right now in the book of John. And I'll just try to read the text to you and give you a little bit of color on it about what it's trying to say. I would love to just start at John 1:1 and tell you why this narrative is John's new beginning, but let's start in verse 4 for sake of time. In him, capital H, we know this is Jesus. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. So the author lets you know right out of the gate how he's going to show you Jesus. Okay? In Matthew and in Luke, you get genealogies. Those authors are trying to tell you how they're going to show you Jesus. John tries to show you Jesus exactly like God tried to show himself in Genesis 1:1. Light shined out of the darkness. So John takes God out of the cosmos, wraps him up in a human body. Okay, scratch that. John takes God out of the cosmos and waits 14 verses to wrap him up in a human body. But for the first few verses, he just tells you that the life of Jesus was the light of men. So every time he moved, talked, breathed, spoke, whatever, he was the light that men had been waiting on. They were already in darkness. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. You remember that from Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. John comes along and says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in God, Jesus, is the light that gives life to men. So the life that Jesus has becomes the light that penetrates the darkness. This is a dual creation account. Except now it's not the creation of Earth, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, and the stars and the sun. Now it's the creation of a whole new world where there's a king on his kingdom, on his throne in his kingdom, and that king is Jesus. See that? That's that light. Verse 5. And the light shines in the darkness. Here's the problem. Watch our dynamic. The darkness doesn't comprehend it. So Jesus comes shining forth the light of God, but the darkness doesn't comprehend the beauty and the power and the majesty of who Jesus was. And so the world really missed her greatest light. So don't be shocked now if the world misses her greatest light in Jesus, but Jesus came, and the world in which he came didn't quite catch what he was trying to do. Verse 6, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. Notice the contrast. The first 5 verses, God came, and God was the life, and the life was the light of men. In verse 6, a man came named John. This is not Jesus. You see that? This man came for a witness, to bear witness of what? The light. So why does John come? John comes as the precursor for the real light. I point behind me because that's what John was doing. He's back there. I don't know where he's at. He's coming. And later on he would say, when he gets here, I got to decrease, he's got to increase. He was not that light. Reread 7. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light. Notice the capital L in the old King James and all these light words. That was the true light which gives light to every man coming into the world. So, John is the precursor of the light. Why doesn't John the apostle, when he's writing this, why don't he just say Jesus? This is not some incidental literary trick. Why doesn't he just say Jesus? In the beginning was Jesus. In the beginning was God, and Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. Because he's trying to show you that the light always existed before he was ever called Jesus. See, he was always the light. He waits to call him Jesus till later in the chapter because he wants to establish that the opposite of darkness has not always been the sun. The opposite of darkness has always been the light of the heavenly. That God wanted to move into this dimension of darkness in human form And that Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. Okay? That's Jesus. Now, chapter 3. Jesus has a conversation with Nicodemus. One of the most infamous passages that we find in the entire book of John. And the scripture that comes out of this is where I want to start. The most famous verse in John is John 3:16. I think it's probably the most famous. You see it in the Super Bowl. Somebody holds up a big poster of John 3:16. You're driving down the interstate and someone's spray painted on the side of a bridge. Way to go with the graffiti, trying to tell people about the love of God. For God, I'm just going to read 16. Everybody knows it, but let's read it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Jesus is actually talking outside of himself here because he's talking about himself, but he's not saying God so loved the world he sent me. He's saying God so loved the world he sent his only begotten Son. It's as if he's standing outside of himself trying to describe the incident of his own arrival. Whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Every believer needs to know John 3:17. I think every believer knows John 3:16, but they forget John 3:17. And in my opinion, John 3:17 is what makes John 3:16 good. Because John 3:16, God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, whoever believes in him shall not perish, have everlasting life. Praise God, I believe every bit of that. But why? Because of John 3:17. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through that Son might be saved. So John 3:16 works because God didn't condemn us when we needed condemned, when we deserved to be condemned. Instead, God sent his Son into the world not to condemn the world, but that same world could take a glimpse of the light and prefer it and want it and run towards it, so that God could flip the light switch on. And every man who would gravitate to the bulb could be saved. And so as great as 3:16 is, 3:17 might be better. Look at 18. He who believes in him is not condemned. He who does not believe is condemned when? Already. This is fascinating. The condemnation that is on the world is not in their future based upon how they act. Jesus came and said the condemnation is on the one who does not believe on him. He's condemned already. Why? Because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Now, if this is where it stopped, we could say that everybody in the world is condemned because they don't accept Jesus, and we would have a good theology, but we would have an incomplete theology with a whole lot of gaps and a lot of question marks in it. But Jesus kept talking, which I think is awesome, to not stop reading, but to see what else he says. And what he says in 19 is the definition of condemnation. 18 was not. The real definition is 19, 20, 21. This is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. So what is Jesus telling us? The condemnation on man is a rejection of the light because they see the light and they prefer to walk in darkness. Now here's my opinion about what's going on in the world. I think most people are not walking in a relationship with Jesus because they've never had the light turned on in their life. They've had religion turned on. They've had condemnation turned on. They've had judgment turned on. They've had the church turned on, but they've never met Jesus. They've never seen him one time, not one time. When they see him, something happens. Something explodes. It's as if when an unbeliever sees Jesus for the first time, it's as if they have seen and found a long-lost relative. It's like they found their father that they didn't know they had, and then one day, boom, he walks into their life. There's something about the light when he comes turning on into the dark, in people's darkness, that makes the difference, every ounce of difference in the world. And so, rather than looking at everybody around you that's not a believer as a bunch of heathens who are just living in blatant rebellion all the time, and everybody just trying to sin like crazy, How about you consider that a lot of them have probably never, ever really seen Jesus shining like light? They've seen him as a dead historical figure. They saw him as a good teacher. They've seen him on a little cross hanging around people's neck. But they've never really known him as the John 3:17 Jesus. We keep preaching him as the John 3:16 Jesus. Believe on him, you don't have to perish. But the John 3:17 Jesus is the reason they'll believe him. Because the Son did not come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So I say to you today, God's not here to condemn you. I'm not here to condemn you. It's why we don't have a standard by which we allow you, what a stupid phrase, but that's happening in the church, by which we allow you to sit in the pew. Because we approve. We think that you have potential. We have looked at your background and feel like you would be a quality member of our church. And the reality is that if you want to dig deep enough in all of our backgrounds and circumvent the blood and act as if Jesus never died, none of us deserve anything. And thank God for the blood of Jesus Christ that has freed us from all of that unrighteousness and sin. And thank God that at some point in our lives, while stumbling around in the blackest of night, somebody flipped a light switch on and introduced us to Jesus. And sure, sometimes it hurt, because when you get used to the dark and the light comes on and your eyes squint and you don't like everything you see because it doesn't look like you thought it looked in your imagination. And I know I'm using the metaphor here, but you know I'm talking spiritually. And then things start to come into the light. Jesus said the one that's condemned is the one that rejects light. See, I don't think everybody is rejecting light. I think a lot of people are rejecting our version of light, which doesn't look a whole lot different than the darkness they're already in. Now, let me qualify that and say, if you meet the Lord and you feel like you just exchanged one burden for another burden, I've got to wonder if anybody ever really turned the light of Jesus on in your life. I don't think what you saw was Jesus. Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden. I'll give you rest. You take my yoke upon you and learn of me. I'm meek and I'm lowly." The real rest provided by Jesus is light, not because there's nothing to do, but because Jesus has done it all and you can let him do it in you and let him finish the work inside of you. This is what people are not seeing. This is what we're not presenting to the world. And they're not seeing the version of Jesus in which Jesus finished the work so now they can rest. So in this amazing conversation that Jesus has with Nicodemus, again, couple points before I move on. I don't know if Nicodemus gets it here. Nicodemus does get it, I believe. He's there wanting the body of Jesus at the crucifixion. I think he gets it. It might take him a little walk into the light. And I hit this a little bit on Sunday that I don't think your salvation is that boom, that moment. You prayed the sinner's prayer and you go, boom, that was the moment. I got saved at 2:05 on a Tuesday afternoon. And that's the moment I got saved. That might be, for some people, that might be the case. But I think for the most part, we walk into our faith one step at a time, like a light in a room, and we're walking towards that light. And then when we get in that room, it's as if we can then become a possessor of that light and carry it into the different areas of our own life. And so the light progressively starts to shine into the different areas. Condemnation would fall when we reject the light and prefer the blindness of darkness. And I think people are looking into the abyss all the time in the world, and that's all they know, and that's their hell. And they're living hell all the time. And we come along and present them with an alternate version of the abyss. You know, work. Maybe you can miss that. And they go, miss it. I'm already in it. I want something that's going to get me out of it. And I'm not here to tell you how to work to get out of the abyss. I'm here to show you some light that you don't have to live in it. And so what we're really doing is trying to inject. That's the whole book of John. It's Jesus injecting light. Let me prove it to you. John 8. All right, we've set it up. Now watch him go to work. Incredible. Incredible. John 8 is, wow, what literature. It's a woman caught in the act of adultery. Yes, that's all we usually categorize the chapter. It's so much more. The John 8 story of the woman caught in the act of adultery is enough to keep you going for a year of sermons and lessons on the beauty of what Jesus did and who he was. I don't want to tell you the whole story. I think you know it. And if you don't, it's glorious homework. I just want to start in verse 10. And I want to show you something that happens that often gets missed because a lot of Bibles break the story in the wrong spot, and we have a tendency to read until they break the story up for us. When Jesus had raised himself up, he saw no one but the woman. He said to her, "Woman, where are your accusers? Where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life." Now I want to show you why Jesus drops this in. John has given you a narrative in which Jesus is the light and everybody else is in darkness. And Jesus himself picks it up in John 8, and he's about to run it in the ground in the next few chapters because he's heading towards the cross. And the closer he gets, the more he wants to be light in the midst of darkness. Would you say the woman caught in the act of adultery is in the abyss? It's about as dark as it gets, right? It's a pretty bad day. It's kind of hard for it to get worse. In fact, it's so bad that there are rocks being held just feet above her head to end her life. You don't get worse until this man, whom she's never met, makes some statement that she probably didn't really understand. He without sin among you cast the first stone. I don't know if she's paying any attention. I mean, would you be? I don't know. She's just down there praying, "If there's a way, save me." Well, she's at the right feet. Thank God. And Jesus makes a remarkable statement. "Woman, where are your accusers? Where are those who condemn you?" Now, I want you, because you just saw John 3:17, I want you to pull that little baby out of your filing cabinet and drop it down in your heart. The Son of Man did not come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Woman, where are your accusers? Who is there to condemn you? And she says, "There are none, Lord." And he says, "Neither do I condemn you." Why? Because in John 3:17, I made you a promise. The Son of Man did not come into the world to condemn the world, but to come into every area of darkness, adulteresses included, and find you in the middle of your hell and tell you that I'm not mad and I don't condemn you. Now, go. This is it. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Why is that important? He just told you in John 3, I didn't come to condemn anybody. I come to be the light so that people that are in the abyss can see the light and run to the light. To the woman in the act of adultery, he says, I don't condemn you. Why? Because I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. It's Jesus saying, when you walk away from this day forward, you're walking in the light. How was he so sure she wasn't going to go out and sin again? Do you think she never sinned again for the rest of her life? Come on. We get so crazy with our theology. Jesus said, neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more. She never sinned again because she knew she wasn't condemned. I don't believe that. I know I'm not condemned. I still mess up. I'm not saying I'm better than her or I'm different than her or whatever, but yeah, she sinned. It wasn't Jesus saying, go and sin no more. If you do sin again, forget it, because I'm going to condemn you all over again. In fact, her eternal security is wrapped up in the 12th verse. What's her eternal security? Jesus just turned, you know what he did today? It was the blackest day of my life. I was in the abyss, and then I saw the light. Somebody flicked the light switch on. And from that moment forward, I walk in the knowledge that the light is in the world and that no one can condemn me. Because Jesus said, here is the condemnation, that men see the light and prefer the darkness. And this woman walks away that day going, today I started out in darkness, but I walk away in light because I believe the man that said to me, neither do I condemn you. Do you think she walked away that day secure? Yeah. Was her security in her ability to not sin, or was her security in that 12th verse in which she just met the light, and you cannot be condemned when you trust in the light? That's it. Now, Jesus is on the move with this thing, man. He's in a groove. You work your way through the 8th chapter, you get some fabulous stuff. But not everybody thinks so, so they pick up rocks to kill him. I mean, within one chapter, the same crew that was going to kill the woman caught in the act of adultery is now going to kill Jesus at the end of the 8th chapter. So we get to the start of the 9th chapter, and when he walks outside, he sees a man standing at the base of the temple steps who's been blind from the day he was born. And the disciples, of course, asked Jesus, which man sinned? Who sinned, this man or his parents? I did a sermon here recently in which I told you that we're always on a sin hunt. We share a characteristic with the disciples. Every time we see something wrong in somebody's life, we go, well, who sinned? Ah, that marriage fell apart. Well, somebody's been cheating. Oh, that guy lost his job. Somebody hadn't been living right. And if you don't think we do it, wait for the next person in your life that something good happens to them and they make this little chestnut. Clean living. I mean, they put money in and 2 bags of chips comes out. Clean living. Like they got, extra grace because they've been doing good. And tell you, that's very popular in most people's mentality, most people's lives. So they're on a sin hunt. Jesus says neither this man or his parents sinned. John chapter 9, verse number 4. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. Now, Jesus knows what he hasn't really went into detail with them in this story, in this passage, is that he's about to die. He's not very many weeks away from the cross. John gives us a fascinating glimpse at the life of Christ, but some theologians think you're seeing Jesus in his last 6 months, with the exception maybe of the marriage at Cana. But you're seeing the last few months of Jesus' life in the book of John. And so Jesus knows the day is coming. The light's about to be shut off. He's referring to Calvary. At the cross, the light's going to be extinguished for a moment. And which is fascinating, and I can't stay on this because I did a whole hour on it last week, but that's why I'm so amazed when Jesus says, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. The last words that comes out of his mouth before they flick the light off is, help them, Daddy. They're about to shut the light off, but keep it glowing. Bring me back. Turn me on one more time. And then every time you show up and Jesus is in you, the light just went to your work. And that's something. But that 5th verse, as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And he's saying it to a man who has never seen light. All he knows is darkness. Remember, his eyes are blind and he has never been able to see. So Jesus is not addressing the kind of darkness that you walk yourself into. That's John 8. The woman caught in the act of adultery, she committed adultery. There was a moment when she was not an adulteress, and then she went into the abyss. And Jesus said, I can turn a light on your abyss. You don't have to sin anymore. And then he goes into someone who didn't walk themselves into the abyss. They're just in it. And they've been in it forever. And to this one, he says, as long as I'm in the world, I'll be the light of the world. It's the last thing the man hears before Jesus addresses him and says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. See how Jesus is making himself out to be light in the middle of different kinds of darkness. Now, we have a darkness that the woman walked into in John 8. We have a darkness that we were born into in John 9. Let's go into a darkness that we die into. John chapter 11. Jesus covers it all. And he's really, I can't get away from that phrase. He's really on fire here, man. He's taking John's narrative of being the light, and he's running with it. And John, I know I said that backwards. John really takes Jesus being the light and runs with it in his book. But it's so clear when you walk through these scriptures that Jesus is establishing himself as the light. John chapter 11 is the story of Lazarus, and God knows I've preached this over and over and over, and I would love to right now because it's one of my go-tos, but I'm going to let you go on the idea that there was a guy named Lazarus and he died and Jesus raised him from the dead. Believe me, there's a whole lot more in there. But when Jesus shows up on his way to Bethany, his disciples have wondered, why we wait 4 days? He's on his way to Bethany, and the disciples don't want him to go back because he thinks the Jews are going to stone him. And the reason they think that is because they almost did in John 8. Remember, Jesus says this in John 11:9. Jesus answered, are there 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. Now, Jesus has just told them in John 9, the day is still shining and the night's coming, nobody can work. So Jesus is telling them, now I've got to go because I'm the light, and if a man walk in the middle of the day, he won't stumble. This tells me that if a man accepts the light that is Jesus, even though his life may not have been completely cleaned up and he still has error and he still has mistake in his life, again, there's no condemnation of that man because he has believed on the light and rejected living in the dark. It's why I am stunned at how much negativity exists among Christians who keep acting like we are going to hell in a handbasket and there ain't no way of turning this thing around. And my reality is I serve He who is the light, and I'm not in the darkness. And though the darkness be around me, I have met the one in whom I dwell and who dwells in me. I cannot help but be optimistic because I believe that if we could introduce people to the light, everything can change. The name of the church slips my mind, but do you remember, if you ever go back and watch any of the documentary footage about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight. Just the wall comes down. Geopolitical situation takes decades and speeches and beliefs and marchings and protests and death and mayhem, and that wall represented a lot of stuff that we don't have time to get into. But do you remember, if you ever watched the documentary on how that thing came down, it basically started coming down one night. Just boom. All of a sudden the world's there going, wow, how's this happening? But it didn't happen that way. And when the evening news started showing what was going on in East Germany, there was a candlelight vigil at the church across the street from where the final rally ended up happening, and the first chunk came out of the wall. And the name of the church slips my mind. But there was a church, a Catholic church across the street, and they held a candlelight vigil. And there was maybe 100 people. And the news cameras would be in there, and you could barely see it. It'd just be a little flicker here and there. And people just starting to believe God was going to do this. And then the next night there was a few hundred. And the next night there was 1,000. And the next night there was 10,000. And the night that the first chunk came out of the wall, there was 500,000 people holding candles, standing in that building and all up and down that street. And when they knocked when they started taking that down, you can find the footage, some of it. There are Germans holding up signs. And there's a sign being held up by a group of East Germans, and it's written in German, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. But in English it says, "Thank you, church." And when I see stuff like that, I think, don't tell me the world's getting worse. And you go, well, that was, 20 years ago. As if in God, that, God's going, oh man, that was 20 years ago. 5 years after that, the apartheid program of South Africa came down, changed, boom, almost overnight. The world began to have a revolution in its heart of forgiveness and grace, and nobody put that label on it. Everybody jumped in with their hand out for politics and went, yeah, we did this. But the reality is somebody nailed it with that sign in German. Thank you, church. Thank you for believing that there really was good left in the world. Thank you for putting light, 500,000 candles. That image is unbelievable. 500,000 candles in the midst of darkness. And people would, maybe you could stand off and laugh and say, well, like that did it. But for those who are believing for the pushing of light into the middle of the darkness, we know what a difference that light makes, because we've seen light in our marriage, and we've seen light in our jobs, and we've seen light in our homes, and light in people's lives, and people who were staring into the abyss with no hope for tomorrow, and suddenly just a candlelight of hope. This is why my heart burns when we get into that word time of the service, because I look out and I see the faces, and I see the people that I've never seen before in my life, and I know that they don't go anywhere, and they came here because somebody gave them a little candle in their spirit, a flicker of hope that maybe you would hear something different if you went down there, or maybe you would find out that God loves you, or maybe there's something in that for you. Thank God. It's a flicker, but it's light. Jesus said, if I'm in the earth, if I'm here, It'll work. Why? Because there's just 12 hours in the day. You got to work while there's light. And I believe, and this was prophetic because the night was coming and that was his cross. But again, Jesus keeps working himself as a light in the middle of the darkness. Let's hurry. John 12. We're heading back to where we started. We're going to apply it to us here for a second before we head to the home stretch. You got to forgive me for getting off on trails. I get excited and I enjoy myself. John 12, verse 35. Jesus has just told us where the judgment's going to happen. Now is the judgment of this world. You know that from 31. Look at 35. Jesus said to them, a little while longer, the light is with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. He who walks in darkness does not know where he is going.
For more information about Paul White Ministries and how you can become one of Paul's partners, visit us online at www.paulwhiteministries.org. That's www.paulwhiteministries.org. Have a blessed day, and may God richly bless you.